Hello, everybody. It's Rick Manning, President Americans for Limited Government, and we're approaching go time on the impeachment inquiry here in Washington, D.C., September 28th. The first impeachment inquiry hearings will be held, and subpoenas will be issued out of that committee for a number of items, most notably for information from the National Archives dealing with a whole variety of different subjects related to Joe Biden's meetings and information regarding flight manifests, how many times did he fly to Ukraine, what were the purposes of those trips, things like that. So the National Archives, which we know was so anxious that they had to get a hold of President Trump's records, that they created an entire special counsel investigation because President Trump and they were negotiating over what was presidential archive and what wasn't. And they didn't like how that negotiation was going. But the same National Archives are now withholding information from Congress and need to have it actually be subpoenaed in order to be able to receive it by Congress to do this inquiry. Funny how that works. Second, they're going to be taking a look at bank records. They're going to be demanding bank records from Hunter Biden, from James Biden, Joe Biden's brother, to name two. And I'm going to share with you why they're wanting those bank records up front. I just want to show you what Dan Goldman, who was the House impeachment manager against President Trump for the Ukraine impeachment. I want to show you what he has to say because he is pretty much the lead defense attorney for Joe Biden.
Respond to my friend and colleague from South Carolina and some of her allegations and statements that she made about this so-called impeachment inquiry. I believe that she stated that Joe Biden got bribes, committed money laundering, and engaged in a prostitution ring. She says there are texts, emails, and phone calls. But then she says that we should trust the evidence itself. And with that, I agree, because the evidence itself shows absolutely no connection between Joe Biden and any of those allegations. So we are now entering into what is so-called an impeachment inquiry, ostensibly because the Republicans say they need more information, and that somehow by the Speaker of the House unilaterally declaring an investigation, an impeachment inquiry, that changes this committee's authority. It does not. This committee has been investigating these allegations for more than 8 months. This committee of House Republicans have obtained more than 12,000 documents, pages of bank records, more than 2,000 suspicious activity reports, numerous hours of witness testimony, texts, emails. And the problem they have is not that they can't get the evidence. The problem they have is that the evidence does not support their allegations. And so why are we going to spend the next few months on an bogus and sham impeachment inquiry? Because Donald Trump wants them to.
Okay, there you go. That ultimately is their defense. As strange as it may seem, the defense is we don't want to actually look at what our good friend Joe Biden actually did or did not do. We don't want to look at Hunter Biden. We don't want to look at any of that. The whole reason this is going to be about, Donald Trump wants them to, hence the House is engaged in this impeachment inquiry. Dan Goldman was the impeachment manager, as I said. He's going to be a familiar face. And you're going to want to, and truthfully, he's going to drive you nuts. He's a smart guy, but he's completely and totally dishonest. But having said that, there's Joe Biden deserves to have a representation in Congress and somebody defending him, and Goldman's going to be that guy. So, and truthfully, he represents the Democrat district in New York State, and he's defending the interests of his constituents. And this is the process. This is the process that we go through. But having said that, there's a, let's just look at what James Comer has to say, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, because he is going to tell you what exactly they do need and what they hope to get, and why they're going this pathway of an impeachment inquiry. So here is James Comer speaking to Sean Hannity.
Well, they wouldn't have to set up a war room, Sean, if they would just provide the information that we've requested. Anything out of the ordinary. We want to know the correspondence that Joe Biden used with the pseudonyms between the government and himself pertaining to Ukrainian policy. We want to know any emails that had Hunter Biden copied on them from the government. This is stuff that should be public record. And with respect to their bank records, Joe Biden had no problem with releasing Donald Trump's tax returns. Joe Biden said he would be the most transparent president in the history. We've already proven that his family got $20 million from foreign nationals. They can't say a single thing they did to earn the money. So obviously we're suspicious about their personal bank accounts. All we want to do is see their personal bank accounts to make sure that Joe Biden wasn't getting his 10%. And make sure that Hunter Biden was telling the truth when he said that he'd give his salary, half his salary, to his father.
I'm going to just tell you, I think that the Republicans are making a mistake with this statement that Comer made. Here's the truth. This is what they have. This is what we know they have. We know we got money from the Chinese, from an entity that was set up to turn foreign political leaders and foreign business leaders to become Chinese assets. We know they got money from that entity. We know that the person who was running that operation, when they got into trouble and the U.S. government was prosecuting them, they called up Hunter Biden and asked, can you get your dad to fix this and get me out of trouble? And Hunter Biden said, I'm working on it. Now, the fact is the guy was convicted. He didn't get out of trouble, but he went immediately to Hunter Biden and said, I've given you money, now deliver. And so he certainly felt that he had an in to get a special hearing with the Vice President of the United States at the time to try to get out of the noose that was around his neck related to his buying foreign political leaders. That's a fact. That is a fact. It is a fact that Hunter Biden was at a board meeting for Burisma. He in Dubai. He was pressured by the CEO and I think the CFO of Burisma, because the Ukraine government, the Ukraine prosecutors were shutting down the foreign accounts of Burisma. And so they were desperate, you've got to do something. And we know that his business partner, Devin Archer, testified that, guess what? Hunter Biden went into a separate room and called DC. There's only one person who's calling it DC, and that was Dad. We know that Devin Archer wasn't in the room, but in talking to people, at least one of the two people who were in the room, they told him that they called Joe Biden. We know that 4 days later, Joe Biden made a speech in Kiev. Now, why is it important to get the manifests of all the flights Joe Biden made to Kiev and to Ukraine when he was vice president? It's pretty simple. Joe Biden said in the infamous video where he brags about doing the quid pro Joe on the IMF funds with Ukraine. He says his 12th or 13th trip he'd made to Kiev. I mean, this guy was in Kiev more than Zelensky. So getting those manifests, finding out how many times he was in Kiev, trying to get trip reports, what the heck happened in Kiev, who was he meeting, because those are all things that are public record. So, and should be available in the archives. So getting that information is important to know. That's a very, very simple request, and it should be publicly available in the National Archives, certainly to Congress. But 4 days later, after he gets this call from Hunter and the Burisma executives, he arrives in Kiev and he makes a speech. And we've shown you that speech a couple of times already, but just to remind you, 4 days later, he makes a speech attacking the prosecutor general, who was the subject of the Burisma executive's ire. A few months later, the prosecutor general gets fired, and Joe Biden ends up in a friendly conversation with this president of Ukraine at the time, saying very clearly, yeah, I'm glad you got that problem fixed. We're going to release the IMF funds now. If Dan Goldman can't figure out that Hunter Biden was being paid by a foreign entity, he was not registered as a foreign agent, registration agent. He was operating as his dad's proxy. His dad was the brand. Hunter Biden gets in, his client has a problem. They call dad. Dad, 4 days later, comes to Kiev and demands the firing of the person who was the problem. Okay, this is not just and withheld IMF funds until the guy got fired. Okay, this is not a situation where you have any need to show that Joe Biden got a dime. If Joe Biden was in fact operating at his family members' request, who were being paid as paid operatives, and he was using the power of the United States to come through for Hunter Biden, who received about $5 million, by the way, from Burisma over the course of 5 years, that is enough. American foreign policy shouldn't be dictated by whose son you can buy, or whose daughter you can buy, or whose wife you can buy. American foreign policy has to be determined by what's in America's interests. Now, the fact is, we do have the Hunter Biden laptop. And in numerous instances in the Hunter Biden laptop, he complains to relatives and others about the cut that his dad is taking, that the big guy is taking. We know that to be true. So we have Hunter Biden specifically making private complaints that his dad got a cut. We have Hunter Biden requesting that his dad take action in Ukraine. And we have his dad taking action. And we have his dad as an after action releasing money due to the Ukrainian government doing what he asked them to do, which was to the benefit of Hunter Biden and his client. So this is not hard. This is straight quid pro Joe stuff. And I believe the mistake that James Comer made in this statement was basically tying any impeachment outcome to showing direct payments to Joe Biden. They had 20 shell corporations. The Biden family set up 20 shell corporations that ran money through 13 banks to try to hide what they were doing. I don't think you need to be able to find the money that was flowing into Joe Biden's account, because it could have come in, it could be in a 14th account. I don't know. They might be able to show it. The bank records might show it. The bank records might not show it. You don't set up 20 shell corporations going through 13 banks if you're just because it was fun to spend the money on lawyer fees. You do that because you're hiding stuff. We have the goods. We have Joe Biden admitting that he extorted the Ukrainian government to fire the prosecutor general. We have the call from Hunter Biden with the Burisma executives demanding he take that action, demanding that he stop what's going on. We have the Joe Biden call with the Ukrainian president saying, thanking him, essentially praising him for firing Shouldnt, the prosecutor general, and saying, I'm releasing the money. This is a obvious cycle of corruption. And no person who in their right mind should look at this and say is anything but an impeachable offense. The Senate may not choose to convict. They may say, gee, we need to see that he actually got money in his own pocket and not just money for $20 to $30 million in all of his relatives' pockets. They may say, gee, it's not even though he was the brand that was being sold, if he didn't get actual personal physical money, then he's okay. I don't think that, but there may be some senators who say that, and certainly Representative Ken Buck from Colorado has gone down that path. And I think James Comer's made a mistake by leaving that pathway open, because I don't know that there'll be any. I don't know what you're going to find in the bank records, and people who are scrupulous about trying to hide transactions would certainly worry about the final transaction that would be the obvious death knell. So that to me is the reality. So I think that he may have made a mistake in setting up that as the criteria, because you can still hear Dan Goldman's voice looming saying, well, if Joe didn't get the dough, then the impeachment's a no-go. It's my poor attempt at Johnny Cochran-esque linguistics, but I think you get the point. Let's see what you all have to say on this. It's a boop, 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 boop. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. I'm going to start from the bottom up. Biden did what Obama told him to do, get rid of the corrupted prosecutor. The Republicans are going to look like fools. Well, I think I just answered that for you, Robin. I think it's pretty obvious that that's not what occurred. And I will tell you, there was actually State Department documents that came out indicating that the State Department had praised the actions by Shouldnt, who was the prosecutor, for the actions he'd taken to actually reform and clean up corruption. And it was Joe Biden who, on the trip that he went out to talk to between the Burisma phone call and the actual speech to the Kiev parliament, that changed the script on the plane to attack Shouldnt. Okay, the intent was to praise what had been done. He changed it. Now I know this only came out the last couple of weeks, but I just encourage you to check that out, because it kind of destroys your narrative. Let's see here, Betsy. I'm afraid the Republicans are going to mess this impeachment up. They aren't very good at attacking the Democrats when it gets down to the nitty-gritty. They back off like Ray for information. Yeah, Betsy, I can't say that I disagree with you. There is you see, I'm just going to put it this way. It's a challenge as a Christian. The Republicans approach these things from a position of trying to be fair and honest. And so they actually look at facts. And when you're trying to be fair and honest, and the other side is basically, have their hands over their ears and kicking and screaming or doing everything they can to obstruct, it becomes very, very difficult to proceed. And so in some respect, the very decency that this kind of really solemn procedure requires works against the Republicans, because you end up with the Ken Bucks of the world, Representative Ken Buck, sitting there and saying things, saying, well, if we don't have check made out to Joe Biden for $1 million, then we don't have anything to show. We don't have anything for acquittal, but we have to say no. And that's the Senate's job. The answer is to this is the House. When the House looks at it, would a reasonable person looking at the set of facts say Joe Biden is in fact guilty of corruption, of selling his political influence? Well, I think a reasonable person would say yes. And with what we learned about what happened on the transpired on the plane, heading to speak to the legislature in Kiev, Joe Biden changed American policy on that plane. He changed the nuance of what was going to be said. And that certainly was the president or vice president's right to do so. Certainly the president and the vice president is given the power over overseeing what was going on in Ukraine. Certainly was in his power to do so. What the bureaucrats decide doesn't matter. What matters is what the elected official decides. But let's not be sanguine thinking the notion that Joe Biden didn't change policy. He was just following policy. He did change policy, and in foreign policy in particular, nuance is everything. And he was not nuanced at all in attacking the prosecutor general very directly, and while acknowledging things that had been done to deal with corruption, undercutting all those things by essentially saying not enough and prosecutors not to be trusted. Let's see here. Judy Keene, Biden needs to be impeached. He's corrupt and not done anything for American people. Selfish family, Biden family. I think that's correct, Julie. And one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about, I mentioned it in the beginning, and we focus on Ukraine, and because we have all this stuff, we have him talking about it. You have everything you want in a prosecution in Ukraine. The one that concerns me is China. Okay. I don't know that our position, whether we be in Ukraine or not right now, if Joe Biden hadn't been involved intimately with Ukraine. But the one that bothers me is China. The FBI knew about these relationships with China for 2 years. 2 years before he got elected president, 2018, 2019. In 2020, so 3 years. They knew about it, and yet they buried it. In the prosecution of the Chinese national who was prosecuted on corruption, they were monitoring every one of his phone calls, every one of his emails. They knew he reached out to Hunter Biden. They knew what Hunter Biden told him. They knew of every single communication that went between Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and this guy. His last name's H.O. But the FBI didn't do anything about it. They buried it. That's what bothers me. I mean, the Ukraine thing is simple corruption, it's pay for play. It's kind of, I hate to say it, but you can be pretty cynical in this town on some stuff. And Joe Biden wouldn't be the first who got caught up in a pay for play scheme. The China one's a lot different in that this was somebody who was actively recruiting the Bidens to be assets for the government, for the communist Chinese. They were actively recruiting them. They were paying them money. So while we focus on Ukraine because there's a lot of video on it, there's lots of things to talk about, and it's a pretty straight line case. The one that scares the heck out of me is the China one, because that's treason. And I hope to God that can't be proven. But that's what we had. That's the real, when you get down to it, That's the thing that's changing, that's affecting our foreign policy right now. At least it may be. And you can't get around the fact that the FBI knew for years that the Chinese were trying to turn the Bidens into assets and were giving them lots of money. And the question is, did they succeed? And we don't know that answer. That's what scares me. You know, we're in a war in Ukraine, a proxy war, but war nonetheless. I think largely because Putin felt he was backed in a corner because Biden's involvement and vested interest in the outcome. But, you know, it's not to excuse the invasion by Russia, but this is a long-term war. This war has been going on since 2014. It just started shooting in the last year and a half. It's cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. We can't get an audit out of the Ukrainians on where the money is being spent. Joe Biden wants another $26 billion this month. Zelensky's in town right now pitching for it. So it's costing us a lot of money. It's costing us a lot of munitions. And it's degrading our capacity to, because we're sending our munitions over there, we have not been able to replace those and restock those munitions. So there's a tremendous cost to us, and our own security is being diminished by what we're doing in Ukraine. And I'm not going to tell you we shouldn't be in Ukraine. Personally, I don't think I would have us in Ukraine. In fact, I've argued against it. But I think there's a reason people can disagree about that. I don't know that we're in Ukraine because Joe Biden took, because of bereavement, because of the money that Hunter Biden got paid. But once again, when you're targeted to be turned by the person in the Chinese government who that's what they do for a living, the number one person in that government for turning foreign officials, somebody who had promoted two Tory candidates in the UK to run for the parliament, to try to infiltrate the parliament. When the Tories found out, they booted those guys off the tickets, and they didn't run candidates in those races. That's what happened when the British intelligence people found out that there was the attempt by the Chinese government to infiltrate Parliament in Britain. Our FBI buried it, hid it, made sure it didn't come out. Had the Hunter Biden laptop for a year and a half, made sure it didn't come out. When it did come out, you had intelligence officials, I use that term loosely, led by the current Secretary of State, go and do I'm sorry, it wasn't Blinken, it was Sullivan, Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor, led by the current National Security Advisor, signed a letter saying that the laptop had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Just enough wiggle, all the earmarks. Oh, we were wrong. They had enough wiggle room to be wrong, to be able to say they were wrong, but all the earmarks. I'm sorry. The system, this whole place is corrupt. This is revealing just how corrupt it is. And the real story about Ukraine is how the same actors who were working with Joe Biden then turned around and impeached Donald Trump for asking about what the heck's going on over there. That's how we kind of square the circle here. That's the day, and so we have to get to the bottom of this. And anybody who sits there like Ken Buck says, gee, I'm against impeachment in all circumstances because I don't like I think it's unseemly to have impeachment. Essentially is saying we're not going to enforce the law against a Democrat administration because they abused the law under a Republican administration. I don't know about you, but that's just upside down, backwards, and not very smart. With that, I'm going to sign off. I appreciate you being on. Hope this was informative and helpful, and we will be back tomorrow.